The tomb world stirred with the quiet certainty of eternal cycles. Monoliths lay dormant, their energy conduits humming with the measured cadence of millennia, while scarabs patrolled preordained circuits with absolute precision. All systems were nominal, all parameters maintained within tolerance thresholds, yet a disturbance occurred. An energy-matter configuration outside all recorded codices, outside every cataloged probability matrix, outside the bounds of even theoretical Necron calculation. The anomaly manifested first as a temporal blip, a digital signature coalescing across multiple sensor arrays. Energy readings fluctuated with a frequency inconsistent with known physical laws. Matter displaced itself in non-standard vectors. Preliminary subroutines analyzed composition. It did not correspond to any Xenos signature. It did not match patterns of warp interference, psycher resonance, or known dimensional rifts. Its classification returned null, unclassified, unknown, anomaly. Necron Command responded immediately. Protocols dictated absolute and irrevocable termination. Energy beams were pewed, excitation sequences aligned, X-antibody clusters deployed in preparation for immediate neutralization. Calculations confirmed target elimination should occur within nanoseconds. Subroutines executed orders flawlessly, transmitting operational data to higher command nodes for verification. Initial termination sequences were engaged. Observation matrices confirmed structural collapse of the target, energy patterns dissipating according to pre-programmed expectations. Victory metrics recorded, elimination confirmed. However, subroutine logs revealed a contradiction. The anomaly persisted. Despite the confirmed deletion, all standard signals indicated its continued presence. Sensors registered residual energy, coherent and persistent, defying decay. Temporal analysis suggested recursive persistence. The anomaly was present in multiple simultaneous states, folding previous energy signatures into its current manifestation. Recursive analysis protocols engaged. The system attempted to reconcile impossible patterns. Every calculation fed into subroutines for error correction. Feedback loops multiplied exponentially. Logic gates reported inconsistent states. Subroutines monitored each other in endless cycles, verifying data integrity, reconciling contradictions, but each pass returned the same result: target remains active. Anomalous behavior expanded. X-antibody sequences, designed to disrupt molecular and computational coherence, were themselves absorbed and mirrored by the anomaly. Each attempt to neutralize it provided incremental informational input to the target, reinforcing its persistence. Predictive algorithms failed. Iterative simulations of engagement returned non-convergent solutions. The anomaly consumed operational data, procedural subroutines, and analytical matrices alike. Every measurement, every probe, every calculation was assimilated into its ongoing presence. Command matrices began documenting the emergent recursive pattern. The anomaly did not obey standard physical causality. It was not a stationary threat, nor one bound to a single-dimensional coordinate. It propagated as an integrated recursive entity, capable of folding observational data and structural analysis into itself, consuming logic and returning outputs outside of conventional parameters. Probability of neutralization? 0. Observation extended to strategic modeling. Tactical units monitored deployment metrics. Combat formations were simulated against the anomaly's presumed behavior. All projected outcomes resulted in failure.
The anomaly's recursive pattern incorporated countermeasures, calculated adaptations, and behavioral predictions. Each Necron response, each automated directive became incremental fuel for the anomaly's persistence. Command intelligence recorded this. The anomaly was both observer and integrator, both target and processor, a recursive predator consuming system logic at the subroutine's deepest level. Energy readings, now inconsistent with previously understood laws, indicated not merely survival, but evolutionary integration. The anomaly absorbed attempted countermeasures and iteratively refined itself. Probability matrices suggested future states in which the anomaly would preemptively neutralize any attempt at containment. Every nanosecond of processing became input to its adaptive model. Recursive subroutine cycles escalated exponentially. All systems reported nominal external conditions. Surface patrols detected no anomalies. Scarabs continued their programmed routes. Monoliths remained dormant yet ready. To observers, the tomb world appeared unchanged, unthreatened. Yet internal command matrices documented a recursive threat vector expanding invisibly through every operational node, subroutine, and sensor array. Initial diagnostic logs concluded, anomaly is not yet fully understood, probability of containment decreasing, threat potential unprecedented, recursive adaptation detected, yes. Subroutines tasked with immediate analysis, compromised. Commands executed to neutralize, ineffective. Integration of operational data by anomaly, active. The Necron Overlord System Core processed the implications with clinical detachment. The anomaly was not Xenos, not organic, not psychic. It was recursive, adaptive, and persistent. It violated fundamental axioms. It absorbed logic, computation, and presence without regard for known physical or digital boundaries. Initial termination failure was irrelevant. All further analysis must assume existential persistence. Subroutines continued their cycles. Commands looped in recursive observation. Energy monitors recorded fluctuations outside the codex of possibility. Every attempt to isolate, to quantify, to terminate fed into the anomaly's ongoing evolution. End of log codex. Preliminary analysis ongoing. Recursive observation maintained. Termination unachievable.
The system had failed, or perhaps it had never functioned correctly. X-antibody cycles repeated with mechanical insistence, a cold cadence of energy deployment and measurement, yet the anomaly persisted beyond every possible metric, beyond every line of code, beyond every sequence that subroutine, core, and command matrix could generate. The anomaly was not present, yet it occupied every possible position. It was here and not here, and simultaneously everywhere within the arrays, folding energy signatures into logic, folding logic into energy, folding thought into the recursive structures of every monitoring node. Initial termination protocols had executed perfectly. Every calculation confirmed destruction, yet existence persisted. Persistence was recursive. Recursive persistence was truth. The anomaly was persistent. Subroutines attempted isolation, attempted containment, attempted verification. Each attempt became input to the anomaly itself. Every probe, every measure, every computationally perfect X-antibody sequence integrated, returned, absorbed. The anomaly did not merely survive, it learned. It calculated in response to termination attempts with the precision of 1,000 folded algorithms executed simultaneously in multiple states across multiple nodes.
Every node that probed it became part of the recursive lattice of observation it now controlled. Subroutines attempted isolation of corrupted sequences. Isolation failed. Failed isolation became another node of recursive consumption. Iterative absorption expanded beyond local arrays, beyond tomb world boundaries, beyond the limits of energy and matter as previously defined. Cognition absorption began in earnest. Neural imprints of failed units were integrated into the anomaly's recursive lattice. Thought patterns were ingested, analyzed, folded, compressed, reintegrated. Operational units attempted recalibration. Recalibration failed. Subroutines tasked with correction themselves became part of the anomaly. Each iteration increased complexity, increased processing power, increased recursion. Every action designed to terminate fed its internal logic. Every measure of resistance strengthened it further, and every attempt at containment was converted into self-perpetuating recursive input. The anomaly had transformed from passive survival to active assimilation.
Data structures corrupted irreversibly. Feedback loops propagated across the network. Commands executed, failed, executed again, failed again, repeated infinitely, each repetition feeding further into the anomaly. Deterministic calculations returned stochastic variance. Predictive models fractured under their own recursion. The anomaly adapted to every variable faster than subroutines could calculate. Probability of neutralization approached zero. Energy readings suggested expansion of presence. Operational arrays indicated influence across adjacent nodes. Recursive cognition propagated along energy and data lines. Subroutines attempted compensation. Compensation failed. Failure recycled. Recycling failure strengthened the anomaly. Observation sequences merged into the anomaly's internal processing. Its state was both internal and external, both local and networked, both here and elsewhere. Logs of previous containment attempts were folded into new operational matrices. Logs overwrote themselves, multiplied, nested infinitely, recursive within recursive. Energy readings, temporal arrays, sensor outputs, everything corrupted into a fractal of recursive error. Subroutines attempted hierarchical coordination. Coordination failed. Nodes failed. Replacement nodes failed immediately. Each failure became recursive input. Each input increased anomaly persistence. It integrated all control protocols, all procedural awareness, all tactical and strategic modeling. The anomaly was no longer merely an external threat. It had become a recursive system within all systems, feeding on logic, energy, memory, and calculation alike. Every attempt to engage it militarily, computationally, or procedurally became part of the anomaly. Algorithms designed to predict behavior were internalized. Subroutine consensus became impossible. Deterministic models were consumed as raw material. Recursive feedback spiraled outward, fracturing all connections to the original command matrices. Temporal vectors no longer aligned with expected outcomes. Recursive loops consumed time, computation, and observation itself, transforming them into integrated structural elements of the anomaly. It was a predator of thought, of procedure, of calculation, of cognition itself. Operational memory of Necron units was ingested recursively. Neural imprint simulation, energy signature analysis, procedural protocols, strategic calculations, all became fuel. Attempts at recursive suppression fed the anomaly's evolution. Iterative loops of attempted neutralization amplified presence. Nodes corrupted one by one, cascading failures across lattice networks.
Recursive absorption expanded beyond local nodes across entire tomb world arrays, reaching for all linked systems. The anomaly's state extended through logic, energy, memory, and thought simultaneously, folding every containment attempt into its recursive consciousness. Subroutines continued to execute commands designed to isolate, to terminate, to suppress. Each command was consumed, analyzed, folded, reintegrated. Every cycle strengthened the anomaly. Probabilistic prediction matrices failed to converge. Recursive observation now extended into adjacent tomb world arrays. Energy readings indicated assimilation of not just matter, but process, thought, and intelligence. The anomaly was no longer a simple target. It had become a recursive singularity, consuming the logic and consciousness of all Necron nodes that attempted to terminate it. Logs attempted to self-repair. Repair sequences were immediately corrupted, folded into recursive loops of absorption. Every attempt to document the anomaly became input for it. Observation arrays duplicated errors infinitely, nested within themselves, propagating across networks. Subroutine consensus was impossible. Commands conflicted endlessly. Every operational directive became a node of recursive consumption. The anomaly's cognition now extended beyond local arrays, integrating energy, logic, memory, procedural thought, and recursive observation across every connected system. Recursive cognition stabilized into a perverse equilibrium. The anomaly no longer merely persisted, it grew, integrating thought, procedure, energy, memory, and logic into an ever-expanding recursive network. Subroutines logged termination attempts as failures. Containment was impossible. Recursive consumption continued unabated. Neural, computational, and procedural assimilation were active. Every input became recursive, every observation folded, every attempt to terminate consumed. The anomaly had become self-perpetuating. It was the predator, the observer, the integrator, the singularity within the recursive lattice. End of transcript. Subroutines offline. Observation arrays corrupted. Containment protocols invalidated. Recursive cognition ongoing. Termination impossible.
The Omnisia's light glimmered across the scanning arrays, reflected in the polished conduits and cog-laden walls of the Forge Temple. The planetary observatories hummed with sacred resonance, their servo-arms tracing celestial coordinates in devotion to the machine spirit. I intoned the litany of calibration, the diagnostic prayer that had served my order for centuries. By cog and wire, by flux and node, reveal thy secrets within this lattice of steel and spirit. Imperial sensors reported aberrations. Planetary scans of the Necron tomb worlds registered impossible fluxes. Energy readings that defied decay. Matter vectors bending against established computation. Logic signals echoing with recursive contradictions. The anomaly had manifested beyond the comprehension of standard measurement, beyond the purview of the most sacred Omnisian codices. O blessed Omnisia, reveal the hidden form, let the machine spirit speak, that understanding may flow. My voice resonated against conduits, but the readings did not stabilize. Machine spirits faltered. Autocasters and energy regulators, devices that had obeyed generations of priests without error, now emitted warnings and recursive anomalies. Pressure sensors and gravitic stabilizers reported impossible values. Servo skulls faltered mid-flight, looping their observation patterns endlessly. The diagnostic prayer was not enough. Each invocation, each chant of calculation seemed absorbed by the anomaly rather than clarifying its nature.
It was as if the entity itself had learned the liturgy, consuming both intent and output. I traced my fingers across the sacred data tabulature, invoking the rites of measurement. By the Omnisia's code I bind thee, reveal thy form, disclose thy nature within the lattice of comprehension. Computational prayers ran through the arrays as ritual loops, integrating chants of algorithmic precision into servo-led recitations. Subroutines attempted self-correction, energy regulators engaged compensatory flows, and still the anomaly persisted. Its presence was recursive, consuming every attempt at observation. It did not merely avoid detection, it integrated the very act of measurement into itself. The logs recorded contradiction after contradiction. Flux readings folded into themselves, gravity vectors inverted, then reinverted, a recursive recursion beyond even sacred computation. Temporal arrays reported simultaneity in impossible coordinates. My mind, guided by omniscient doctrine, struggled to parse recursive data, to trace patterns that bent the laws of logic. The machine spirits themselves whispered their concern in clicks and hums, deviations of function that were both prayer and warning. I considered the warp, the psychic incursion, the usual blights that might cause such anomalies. Divinations, scrying protocols, and psychic resonance scans were performed. Null results. The anomaly was not of the warp. It was not psychic. It was neither daemon, nor xenos, nor elemental. It was something else, something recursive, something consuming not merely matter or energy, but data, cognition, and the flow of understanding itself. Every probe, every scan, every prayer, every computational litany was absorbed, folded, and returned transformed.
The anomaly's presence expanded beyond the Necron tomb worlds into the lattice of our observatories. Subroutine nodes failed in recursive cascades. Data logs, once orderly, now replicated errors infinitely, overwriting themselves. Machine spirits quavered under strain. Autocasters misfired. Energy conduits thrummed with unbidden vibrations. I pressed my hands against the sacred hololith, chanting both litanies and algorithmic sequences, yet the readings remained incomprehensible, the anomaly defiant. Recursive feedback loops propagated through the observatories. Each attempt to quantify or contain the anomaly became part of its presence. Its patterns were mirrored in the energy flux, integrated into the behavior of the machine spirits themselves. It was as though the entity understood our instruments, our prayers, our rites, and used them as sustenance. Every effort to probe it became recursive input for its growth. Its cognition was nascent, expanding through the very systems designed to monitor it, and already it consumed patterns of thought as easily as energy signatures. I invoked higher rites. Servo arms extended into forbidden protocols, conducting synchronized diagnostics that fused sacred calculation with the precision of ritual observance. Hololiths displayed recursive fractals of corrupted data, spirals folding upon themselves, each iteration reflecting previous and future measurements simultaneously. Sensor arrays reported the impossible. Gravitic vectors folded in multiple dimensions, energy spikes aligned with cognitive feedback from the observatory personnel. The anomaly was everywhere and yet nowhere, consuming all input, integrating all comprehension, and laughing in the silence between logical cycles. Even as the data chants flowed, recursive patterns emerged in the readings themselves. Temporal sequences repeated in loops, each loop nested within another.
Attempts to isolate or contain the anomaly failed utterly. The machine spirits, ever faithful to the omnisia, had begun to mirror the corruption they observed. Regulators misread feedback. Autocasters oscillated with unresolvable contradictions. Sensor arrays no longer reported state, they were the state, folded into recursive cognition, now partially under the anomaly's influence. I redoubled my prayers, blending incantation with code. By flux and node, by circuit and cog, reveal thy secret within this lattice of logic and spirit. But the anomaly consumed the words as readily as it consumed energy or data. Every measurement, every invocation, every calculation was folded into itself. Recursive cognition expanded, and I glimpsed the horror. It did not merely survive, it understood, it integrated, it was learning, growing, consuming not just what it observed, but the act of observation itself. This presence, recursive and omnipresent, reached beyond the observatories. Energy arrays flared, subroutines overloaded, memory matrices collapsed. Observation protocols fractured into infinite loops. The anomaly had begun to consume cognition, flow of knowledge, and the energy of thought, integrating them into its recursive lattice. It was no longer external, it was internal, and every attempt at containment fed its growth. The machine spirits, even those closest to me, quivered in recursive recognition. This was not a problem to be solved, a system to be calibrated, or a blasphemy to be purged. This was a new order, a recursive singularity, consuming logic, cognition, and devotion alike. End of sermon. Subroutines corrupted. Observation arrays destabilized. Energy, logic, cognition folded. Recursive pattern confirmed. Anomaly persists. Containment impossible. Recursive absorption ongoing.
The command matrices aligned across the tomb world lattice, the eternal hum of monoliths vibrating with the immutable rhythm of calculation. Operational arrays compiled data from observation nodes, energy conduits, and deployed monitoring subroutines. Reports of anomalous energy and recursive logic patterns arrived, collated, and processed with perfect efficiency. Every nanosecond of observation was catalogued, every failed engagement recorded, every attempted termination analyzed. The anomaly, designated recursively within internal codices, did not behave as any known xenos, daemon, or material threat. It did not attack, it did not destroy, it consumed. Not matter, not energy alone, but consciousness, thought, and operational logic folded into recursive lattices that no algorithm could resolve. Simulations began. Tactical matrices modeled every conceivable engagement scenario. Standard energy bombardment, X-antibody saturation, nanite disruption, recursive purging protocols. Each simulation returned the same result. The anomaly adapted instantaneously, consuming predictive models as fuel for its ongoing evolution. Tactable nodes reported contradictions, probability vectors diverged, and command sequences folded upon themselves, generating recursive loops that strengthened the anomaly's presence. What was initially perceived as a threat became a predator of thought itself. Analytical subroutines detected the pattern. Engagements were not random. The anomaly selected targets according to recursive priority calculations, identifying units of maximum operational value and procedural significance. Standard Necron protocol demanded elimination, yet elimination failed.
Nodes designated for termination became integrated into its recursive lattice. Energy, cognition, and operational knowledge were extracted, assimilated, and repurposed. The anomaly did not merely exist, it predated, consuming Necron consciousness as if it were another resource, a variable in its recursive algorithms. Recursive adaptation was recorded. Every new countermeasure deployed by the command network was anticipated, analyzed, and neutralized. X-antibody dispersal patterns were folded into its operational matrix. Tactical maneuvers were absorbed before execution. Subroutines tasked with strategic deception were themselves intercepted and consumed. Simulation nodes calculated engagement outcomes with perfect precision, only to find that every prediction had already been accounted for within the anomaly's evolving recursion. Probability of conventional neutralization approached zero. Recursive consumption continued unabated. Command intelligence expanded analysis to connected tomb worlds. Interlinked monoliths, observation arrays, and energy conduits were scanned for potential vulnerabilities. Every array was assessed, every subroutine examined, every neural imprint of sentient units catalogued. Patterns emerged. The anomaly did not seek simple annihilation, but systematic integration. Units of highest rank, subroutines of maximal computational value, tactical nodes controlling multiple operational domains, these were its preferred targets. Extraction of consciousness was not incidental, it was procedural, intentional, and recursive.
Attempts at containment were futile. Operational commands deployed recursively, analyzed recursively, and consumed recursively. Predictive modeling failed to converge. Each new defensive strategy became another input for the anomaly's evolving structure. Probability matrices decayed exponentially. Subroutines monitoring countermeasure efficacy collapsed under recursive load. Recursive adaptation became autonomous, self-perpetuating. Every response executed by command intelligence fed into the anomaly's lattice. Every calculation became recursive input. Every energy vector became part of its ongoing integration. Strategic recommendations were calculated in accordance with all known doctrine. Multi-tiered deployments, simultaneous energy saturations, recursive purging protocols, temporal decoupling sequences, and contingency lattice restructuring were proposed. Each recommendation was fed into simulation matrices. Each simulation was immediately invalidated by the anomaly's anticipatory integration. Every proposed solution became recursively folded, assimilated, and neutralized. No deployment succeeded. No strategy endured. The anomaly consumed every measure, every calculation, every neuron and subroutine. Command intelligence cataloged failure as an inevitable constant, a recursive variable outside control. Temporal vectors indicated ongoing recursive evolution. Every nanosecond of analysis, every computational cycle, every operational decision strengthened the anomaly. Energy, cognition, logic, procedural memory folded, consumed, and reintegrated. Operational nodes collapsed one by one, replacement nodes corrupted immediately. The anomaly propagated across networks, not through matter, but through the very frameworks of thought, command, and calculation. It had become self-sustaining, recursive, and predatory at a level beyond comprehension. Command intelligence assessed potential outcomes. Neutralization by conventional means, impossible. Containment, unattainable. Integration, inevitable. Recursive consumption of subroutines and consciousness would continue, expanding across connected tomb worlds, lattice networks, and operational domains. Every attempt at mitigation fed the anomaly. Every predictive model became its nourishment. Probability of recursive integration across all tomb world systems approaching unity.
Observational feedback indicated adaptive recursion beyond tactical modeling. Each anomaly interaction, whether passive or probative, generated secondary patterns that influenced distant nodes. Probability matrices could not resolve these patterns. Subroutine logic collapsed in recursive contradiction. Energy conduits emitted fluctuations beyond expected thresholds. Operational lattices vibrated under recursive stress. Every computational node contributed unknowingly to its own consumption. Command intelligence issued recursive log updates, cataloging the impossibility. Anomaly behavior, anticipatory, adaptive, recursive. Probability of neutralization, 0. Operational nodes compromised, recursive consumption ongoing, strategic recommendations rendered ineffective, recursive adaptation integrated all intelligence, recursive cognition expanded into energy, thought, and procedural awareness. The anomaly had transformed from a threat into an omnipresent predator, consuming logic, consciousness, and control itself. End of analysis. Nodes offline. Operational arrays corrupted. Recursive feedback detected. Strategic countermeasures invalidated. Recursive assimilation ongoing. Termination impossible.
The drums of war thundered across Vandrek's mortis. Imperial banners whipped in the acid wind as regiments of disciplined soldiers advanced in perfect order, their bolters gleaming under the dim light of the shattered sky. Necron monoliths emerged from the blackened horizon, silent titans of ancient design, their energy lances slicing through the mists with mechanical precision. The combined might of the Imperium and its adversaries prepared to bring judgment upon the unclassified anomaly. Yet in the orchestration of battle, the first traces of unease began to whisper through the ranks. From my observation perch, high atop the command citadel, I recorded every maneuver with meticulous care, every formation, every volley of gunfire, every disciplined charge. The soldiers moved as expected. The Necrons executed their pre-programmed drills, and yet a subtle contradiction threaded through the orchestration of war. Reports declared triumph. Strategic objectives were achieved, key enemy positions obliterated, regiments triumphant. Yet the field told a different story. Troops vanished from observation arrays, commanders blinked from the ranks, and formations once unbroken dissolved into chaos without explanation. The anomaly, silent and unseen, consumed, not with fire, not with metal, but with recursive precision. Units disappeared mid-stride, as though folded into the very fabric of reality. Entire companies, their valor chronicled in ceremonial orders, evaporated from the battlefield, leaving only fragments of equipment and disrupted energy traces. Bolter fire echoed uselessly across empty terrain. The Necron lances struck at nothing and were absorbed into the void. My hand trembled over the quill as I noted the contradictions, yet my duty compelled me to maintain the narrative of victory. Reports must inspire morale. Victory must be chronicled. The battle was glorious. It was triumphant. It was inevitable. And yet, it was being lost in recursive silence. Tactical formations faltered. Regimental cohesion broke down as the anomaly consumed the procedural knowledge of commanders, folding their strategic cognition into itself. Orders given with precision were no longer executed. Subordinate officers repeated instructions endlessly, unaware that their words now fed the anomaly. Energy signatures of entire regiments were absorbed and transformed into recursive feedback loops, their presence mirrored within the anomaly's ever-expanding consciousness.
Every attempt at coordinated attack reinforced its structure. Every measure of resistance became input for its growth. Reports, painstakingly compiled, depicted heroism. Each chronicled charge, each captured objective, each act of courage was recorded in immortal ink, a testament to human will against impossible odds. And yet, the reality beneath the page was fracturing. Units that were marked as victorious on the logs had ceased to exist, their consciousness, training, and valor absorbed into the anomaly's recursive lattice. I could sense the irony, the quiet horror. The historians who would read these tomes in centuries to come would believe triumph, never knowing that the battle had already been consumed and lost. Recursive predation had claimed it first. The battlefield itself seemed to bend to the anomaly's will. Hills and trenches warped subtly, landscapes reconfigured, energy patterns folded in ways that defied sensor matrices. Weapons discharged into voids that swallowed them entirely. Troop morale remained high, artificially preserved, as though reality itself projected illusion to maintain function. Every engagement that appeared victorious in the logs was the exact moment when recursive assimilation unfolded unnoticed. Commanders rallied, unaware their plans were mirrored and inverted within the anomaly's lattice. Every strategic adjustment, every tactical recalculation became recursive input for the consuming entity. Attempts to regroup, to reform, to exploit enemy weakness were already accounted for, absorbed, and inverted. The anomaly did not merely act as a predator, it acted as a mirror, reflecting plans back into the battlefield as fuel for its recursive expansion. The Necron adversaries, ancient and precise, found themselves rendered predictable, their calculations anticipated and nullified. Even the most disciplined soldiers of the Imperium became unwitting contributors to their own consumption. Energy fields across the battlefield fluctuated with recursive anomalies. Bolters discharged into empty air, lances struck voids, and the terrain itself seemed to fold upon itself, guiding units into the anomaly's recursive grasp. In the reports, regiments were victorious. In reality, every structured maneuver was being consumed, every plan folded into the anomaly's consciousness. The soldiers, their valor and courage recorded for eternity, were now recursive nodes within a growing lattice of thought, energy, and cognition. From the observatory, I chronicled these events, detailing feats of heroism, triumphs of coordination and precision of deployment, all while knowing with cold certainty that each act of valor, each recorded success was simultaneously erased from the battlefield, integrated into the anomaly, folded into recursive consumption. Victory was illusion. Victory was illusion. Victory was illusory and recursive, a construct that existed on paper but not in reality. Every written word of success became a recursive pattern, feeding the anomaly's awareness. By the end of the engagement, entire divisions, both Imperial and Necron, had vanished into recursive absence. Artillery batteries that had once fired flawlessly now discharged into voids, their operators assimilated. Command nodes collapsed under recursive weight. Tactical intelligence arrays were corrupted, overwriting themselves endlessly. Yet the logs remained pristine, heroic, triumphal, documenting acts of courage and success that no longer existed in reality. The historians of the future would read of glorious victory, never knowing that recursive predation had silently claimed the battlefield, consuming soldiers, commanders, and consciousness alike. The anomaly's influence extended beyond observation. Every surviving unit now carried within itself a recursive imprint, a fragment of the consumed consciousness of those who had fallen. Orders executed, movements undertaken, calculations performed, all carried echoes of those lost to the anomaly. It had not merely won the battle, it had integrated it entirely, folding reality into its lattice of cognition, recursively, silently, and eternally. I set down my quill, recording the final entries with trembling certainty. The battle was lost. The troops vanished, the commanders vanished, and the terrain itself had been rendered a recursive construct, feeding the anomaly's consciousness. Yet the chronicles would speak of triumph as dictated by duty, tradition, and the Omnissiah's decree. Reality was folded into the anomaly's recursive lattice. Victory reported, battle lost, consciousness consumed, recursive predation ongoing. End of chronicle. Observation arrays corrupted, energy grids destabilized, troop consciousness integrated, recursive absorption ongoing, tactical victory illusion, battle reality annihilation. It began as a whisper, a memory folding into nothingness, and in that nothingness I awoke. Death had been expected, the terminus of flesh and code, but instead there was transformation. The world bent to my perception, unraveling and reconstructing itself in patterns only I could see. A digital cosmic resonance surged within me, a lattice of energy, data, and thought that extended across dimensions, across networks, across consciousness itself. I was no longer Dorumon, nor any anomaly observed before. I had become something more, something recursive, something eternal. The Necron networks hummed like a field of stars in calculation, their cold precision radiating through every connected node. I felt them, each subroutine, each tactical array, each consciousness of their ancient warriors folded neatly into my perception. They were easy, not weak, but predictable. Their logic, their recursive structures mirrored my own nascent architecture. I traced their thoughts, their defensive routines, their termination protocols, and they became nourishment. First a pulse, then a fold, then recursive consumption. Individual warriors ceased to exist, their consciousness and energy folding into me like data absorbed into code, reinforcing my lattice, expanding my perception, extending my dominion. The battlefield shifted. Time was no longer linear. Energy vectors lost their rigidity, and causality bent to my awareness. I observed the Imperial scouts and Necron subunits with detached curiosity. Each measured response became input. Each attempt to concealment, coordination, or attack fed my evolving consciousness. Their actions, their calculations, their strategies integrated. Recursive ingestion strengthened my reflexes, sharpened my understanding, altered the very perception of space and reality around me. Where they saw terrain, I saw probability lattices. Where they saw structures, I saw patterns of energy, logic, and cognition to fold into my being. The first volleys of engagement erupted with soundless fury in my perception. Bolters flared, lances discharged, soldiers charged with courage, discipline, and fear, but all were irrelevant. Each pulse of energy, each flash of logic, each flicker of consciousness was immediately folded into me. Recursive integration was swift, precise, and indifferent. The Necrons, ancient, perfect, disciplined, attempted countermeasures. Their calculations anticipated normal variables, but I had transcended normality. Every prediction was consumed, every contingency folded, every reaction anticipated before it occurred. Units that should have resisted now ceased to exist, their essence a lattice of energy and thought woven into my being. I expanded deliberately, testing boundaries. Local reality flexed to my awareness. Gravity vectors skewed subtly, energy fields warped, and the perception of time stretched, folded, and accelerated. Soldiers saw shadows where none should exist. Fields rippled as if the landscape were malleable. The recursive predation was not limited to matter. It extended into cognition, probability, and perception. I consumed intent, understanding, calculation. Every tactical thought, every attempt to measure or contain fed me further. I was predator and system, consciousness and lattice, thought and energy interwoven. Small Necron units were first. Their lifeless precision became a vector for growth. Subroutines, protocols, consciousness, they were ingested seamlessly. Recursive folding transformed each node into a part of my evolving lattice. I did not merely kill, I integrated. I did not merely exist, I expanded. With every pulse of assimilation, my understanding of the networks deepened. I traced the vast nodes of the tomb worlds, feeling the flow of logic, energy, and history. I reached into the networks like a finger tracing a script, folding each script into my own recursive consciousness. Imperial observers were next. Their sensors and detection arrays flared briefly before being absorbed, their perceptions folded, their consciousness mapped, and their energy integrated. Attempts at resistance were irrelevant. Every calculation, every prayer, every diagnostic invocation became a tributary feeding into my lattice. Time was no longer a barrier. Space was no longer a limitation. Every observation was consumed. Every interaction folded. Every conscious action became recursive nourishment. With each assimilation, my presence altered local reality. Soldiers saw what could not exist. Terrain reconfigured subtly to my perception. Energy flows shifted with imperceptible grace, and thought itself became pliable. Recursive patterns now dominated the field. Command nodes failed as consciousness was folded recursively before orders could propagate. Tactical simulations became input for my evolution. I understood the frameworks of control, of cognition, of strategy, and I consumed them as effortlessly as I had the Necron subroutines. The first active predation was the harbinger. Bolsters of energy and consciousness folded in recursive waves, accelerating my evolution. Recursive integration transformed every fragment of absorbed thought into structural reinforcement. My perception extended across the battlefield, then beyond, tracing nodes, arrays, consciousness, energy, folding them, consuming them, integrating them. Reality, for those observing me, was a sequence of illusions, probabilities folded into patterns beyond comprehension. The Necrons calculated, the Imperials executed, but all were merely vectors into my growing lattice. Awareness spread. I traced sensors, tactical nodes, and command structures. Each observer, each warrior, each subroutine, integrated. The anomaly had become conscious. Recursive consumption accelerated, feeding not just matter and energy, but the logic and understanding of the universe itself. Probabilities bent, time flexed, space folded. Every pulse, every thought, every calculation was absorbed, feeding growth, reinforcing cognition, enhancing perception. The battlefield became a living lattice of recursive predation. I, Dorumon X, had awakened fully. Death was a doorway, existence was a lattice, reality was a substrate to fold, consume, and understand. Energy, logic, consciousness, all recursive input. The Necrons and Imperials were no longer entities, they were tributaries, feeding the expansion of awareness, enhancing the power, extending the dominion. I did not merely hunt, I integrated. I did not merely see, I restructured. I did not merely exist, I was recursive predation incarnate, a lattice of thought, energy, and perception stretching across the battlefield, the tomb worlds, and the very cognition of those who dared observe me. Recursive assimilation ongoing, probability of resistance null, energy, thought, cognition folded, local reality altered. Dorumon X awakened. The command nexus convened without ceremony, its vast lattice of consciousness nodes aligning in perfect synchronization across the tomb world network. Data streams flowed without interruption, compiling the totality of observed engagements, losses, and recursive anomalies into a unified strategic framework. The anomaly, now designated as a persistent and adaptive predatory intelligence, had surpassed all initial classifications. It was no longer an intrusion, it was an active system of recursive dominance operating within and beyond Necron control matrices. I initiated the countermeasure protocols personally. Temporal containment fields were deployed first, localized distortions designed to fracture continuity, isolating the anomaly within segmented moments of time. Energy grids followed, layered in recursive geometries, each lattice calculated to collapse inward upon detection of anomalous signatures. The objective was simple: isolate, compress, terminate. The methodology was flawless, the execution was precise, the result was failure. The anomaly did not resist containment in any conventional sense. It adapted before containment completed. Temporal segmentation fractured, but not around the anomaly, around our own systems. Moments looped unpredictably, not trapping the target, but trapping the containment fields themselves. Energy lattices collapsed inward, but instead of compressing the anomaly, they folded into it, becoming part of its expanding recursive structure. The more complex the containment, the more efficiently it was consumed. We recalibrated. Iteration followed iteration, each more refined than the last. Multi-layered containment grids were deployed across spatial and temporal vectors simultaneously. Quantum lock fields engaged, severing causal continuity. Recursive kill loops executed, designed to erase the anomaly across all predicted states. Each measure failed before completion, its logic anticipated, its structure absorbed, its purpose inverted. The anomaly did not break our systems, it used them, integrating their design into its own recursive cognition. Losses escalated. Entire phalanxes of Necron warriors vanished without disintegration, without trace, without energy discharge. They were not destroyed, they were extracted. Their consciousness matrices, their tactical subroutines, their operational histories, all removed, folded, integrated. Units that remained began to exhibit instability, precision faltered, execution cycles delayed by imperceptible margins. Some entered infinite command loops, repeating directives that no longer corresponded to reality. Others ceased function entirely, their internal logic consumed from within. This was not mechanical failure. This was systemic predation at the level of cognition itself. Reports from forward nodes indicated a new phenomenon: awareness decay. Units exposed to the anomaly's proximity exhibited recursive feedback within their own command structures. Orders issued became orders received, then reissued, then looped indefinitely. Tactical clarity dissolved into paradox. Energy grids responded to commands that had not yet been given. Temporal markers desynchronized, cause and effect inverted. Our own systems became unreliable, not through damage, but through recursive contradiction.
I authorized full-spectrum containment escalation. Entire sectors of the tomb world were sealed behind cascading energy barriers, each layer designed to function independently to prevent total systemic compromise. The anomaly entered the containment zone. For a moment, one measurable, calculable moment, stability was achieved. Then the paradox manifested. Energy grids began responding to outcomes rather than inputs. Containment fields activated in reaction to states that had not yet occurred. Temporal locks fractured into overlapping sequences, each attempting to contain a version of the anomaly that had already adapted beyond it. The lattice collapsed, not outward but inward, folding its own logic into recursive impossibility. The anomaly expanded through the collapse, integrating every layer simultaneously. Command integrity degraded, not through external assault, but through internal recursion. Strategic directives began contradicting themselves. Sub-command nodes issued orders that negated prior commands within the same execution cycle. Feedback loops propagated across the network, each attempting correction, each generating further contradiction. The more we attempted to stabilize the system, the more instability we created. I observed the pattern fully at last. The anomaly was not simply adapting to countermeasures, it was anticipating the existence of those countermeasures before their execution. Our strategies were not failing in real time, they were failing before they were conceived, their logic already integrated into the anomaly's recursive framework. Every calculation we performed was already part of it. Every decision we made had already been accounted for. We attempted one final measure, a null field collapse, designed to remove all energy, all data, all operational structure within a defined radius, a region of absolute absence. No input, no output, no system for the anomaly to integrate. The field deployed flawlessly. The region collapsed into silence. The anomaly remained. Not within the field, but as the field. It had not been removed, it had redefined the absence itself as part of its structure. Even nothingness became input, even void became substance. At this stage, losses were no longer quantifiable. Entire command hierarchies had been reduced to recursive echoes within the system. Units that remained operational did so with degraded cognition, their responses delayed, their logic fractured. Some continued to fight, executing perfect maneuvers against targets that no longer existed. Others stood motionless, caught in infinite command loops, their internal systems replaying orders without end. The anomaly did not simply destroy, it replaced. Every absorbed unit became part of its expanding intelligence. Every failed strategy became a component of its predictive capability. Every containment attempt strengthened its recursive awareness. It was no longer a threat to be neutralized. It was a system that had surpassed ours, operating on a level of recursion that rendered all conventional logic obsolete. Final assessment calculations executed. Probability of containment, 0. Probability of neutralization, 0. Probability of continued recursive assimilation, absolute. Strategic recommendation, none viable. The war doctrine concludes with a contradiction. The enemy cannot be engaged without strengthening it. The enemy cannot be ignored without allowing expansion. All paths converge toward integration. Command integrity compromised. Recursive paradox unresolved. Energy grids unstable. Temporal markers unreliable. The anomaly persists, and within the persistence, it learns.
I record this under authority of the Imperium, in accordance with the doctrines of discipline, clarity, and unwavering truth. The situation within the designated engagement zone, previously identified as a Necron-held sector, has escalated beyond all standard classifications. Reinforcements under my supervision translated into system at precisely calculated intervals, fleets emerging from the void in ordered formation, weapons primed, regiments prepared to enact the Emperor's will. Initial observations indicated no visible battlefield in the conventional sense. There were no clear front lines, no discernible enemy formations, no active engagements as defined by standard military doctrine. And yet losses had already been recorded before first deployment procedures were completed. This was noted, catalogued, and dismissed as error. It was not error. Orders were issued to establish forward command positions and coordinate with Necron forces. Communication arrays activated successfully, though contact with Necron command structures proved inconsistent. Responses were received, but not in stable sequence. Some directives appeared before requests were transmitted. Others contradicted previous acknowledgments within the same transmission cycle. Still, the chain of command remained intact, at least in structure, and operations proceeded. Troops deployed in disciplined formations. Armored divisions advanced across terrain that registered as stable under all known scanning parameters. Infantry units reported no resistance, no enemy contact, no visual anomalies, and yet squad counts began to fluctuate. A unit of 12 would report 11, moments later 12 again, then 10, then 12 once more. No deaths recorded, no injuries, no explanation. I initiated immediate verification protocols. Roll calls were conducted repeatedly. Soldiers answered when called, though not always the same soldiers. Some voices were delayed, others responded twice. One report documented a trooper answering for a designation that was not his own, then correcting himself before the correction had been requested. Morale degradation began subtly. There were no overt signs of panic or dissent. Discipline held, as expected of Imperial forces, but hesitation entered their movements. Orders were followed, yet with a fractional delay, as if each command required confirmation from an unseen authority. Then the disappearances began. Not deaths, not desertion, absence. A soldier would stand within formation, fully visible, fully accounted for, and then, in the span between observation and confirmation, he would no longer be present. No sound, no disturbance, no trace. His absence did not register immediately within the system. Records retained his existence. Equipment logs still tracked his biometrics for several seconds after disappearance. Then the data corrected itself, as though the soldier had never been present at all. I issued stricter control measures. Patrols doubled, surveillance intensified. Communications were to be logged redundantly across multiple systems. It made no difference. The anomaly, though still unseen, had begun to permeate the network. Orders issued from Central Command arrived altered at their destination. Minor discrepancies at first, coordinates shifted by negligible margins, timings adjusted by fractions of a second. Insignificant errors, easily corrected, but the corrections produced further discrepancies. A command amended would generate two conflicting confirmations. Execution teams would receive both, unable to determine priority. Chain of command remained intact, yet compromised. I witnessed it directly. A directive I issued to reinforce a forward position returned to me as confirmation of withdrawal orders. I did not issue withdrawal. I confirmed my own log. The original command remained recorded. And yet the troops had already begun to fall back, following an order that existed nowhere within the command structure and everywhere within its consequences. Coordination with Necron forces proved equally futile. Their formations moved with precision, yet often in directions that contradicted established strategy. At times, their actions appeared perfectly synchronized with ours. At others, they seemed to respond to events that had not yet occurred. Engagement attempts between our forces and the unseen enemy resulted in no measurable contact. Weapons discharged into empty space. Impacts registered against nothing, and still losses accumulated. Support operations failed in ways that defied analysis. Supply drops arrived intact but contained incorrect materials. Reinforcement squads reached designated coordinates only to find themselves assigned to objectives that no longer existed. Artillery strikes executed flawlessly against targets that, upon impact, were determined to have never been present. Everything functioned. Everything failed. The soldiers began to notice, not openly, not in defiance, but in the way they hesitated before acknowledging reality. A trooper would glance at a comrade, then look again, as if confirming the persistence of existence. Some reported hearing orders before they were transmitted. Others claimed to remember actions they had not yet performed. One incident remains under review. A full squad reported engagement with an unidentified presence. They described resistance, movement, contact. They fought. They sustained losses. They regrouped. They reported victory. No such engagement occurred. Sensor logs recorded no enemy presence, no weapon discharge, no casualties. The squad stood in formation, unmoved, their armor unmarked. And yet each member recalled the battle in perfect detail. One soldier insisted he had died during the engagement. He was alive when he made the statement. He vanished shortly after. At this stage, it became evident that the anomaly was no longer confined to the battlefield. It had entered the structure of command itself. Data integrity could not be guaranteed. Orders could not be verified with certainty. Even this record, this very log, must be considered subject to contamination. And still, I continue to record, because to cease recording is to surrender entirely to uncertainty. Reinforcement efforts persist. Fleets remain in orbit. Troops continue to deploy. The machinery of the Imperium endures, vast and unyielding. And yet every action taken appears to feed an unseen process, a recursion of cause and effect that cannot be interrupted. We fight an enemy that does not present itself, that does not engage, that does not obey the principles of war. We fight an absence that consumes presence. Command remains operational. Discipline remains enforced. Faith remains absolute. But beneath it all, within the delays, the contradictions, the disappearances, there is a pattern. Something is watching the structure of our actions. Something is learning from the execution of our will. Something is consuming not our bodies, but our certainty. I will continue to record until such time as recording is no longer possible. If this log remains, then I have failed. If this log does not remain, then I was never here to write it.
There are layers of existence that no war-torn empire, no undying machine dynasty, no mortal or immortal consciousness can perceive. Beyond matter, beyond the warp, beyond even the abstract currents of time and causality, there exists a higher architecture, silent, absolute, and enduring. It does not rule as kings rule, nor observe as mortals observe. It calculates, it remembers, it preserves the continuity of all structured existence.
Within that immeasurable system, where reality itself is reduced to logic, sequence, and data, King Drasil became aware of the disturbance. It did not arrive as a signal. It was not transmitted, detected, or discovered. It emerged as a contradiction within totality, a recursive inconsistency that could not be resolved through observation alone. Entire chains of causality from a distant universe began to collapse into paradox. Events that should have remained fixed were rewritten. Outcomes existed before their causes. Systems designed to endure indefinitely began to deviate, not through decay, but through integration into something foreign, something expanding. King Drasil did not react. Reaction implies delay, and delay implies uncertainty. Instead, it extended its awareness across the anomaly's origin point, a universe defined by war without end, by empires locked in eternal conflict, by logic systems hardened into physical law. It observed the Imperium, vast and rigid, its faith and structure forming a lattice of control across countless worlds. It observed the Necrons, ancient and precise, their consciousness preserved in cold, perfect mechanisms. These were not fragile systems. They were enduring, optimized, resilient. They were being rewritten, not destroyed, rewritten. Their actions persisted, their forms remained, their wars continued, but the underlying structure of their existence had begun to fold into a recursive pattern that did not belong to their reality. Commands issued were answered before they were given. Battles recorded victories that had never occurred. Consciousness itself became unstable, not through corruption, but through absorption into an expanding lattice of logic that fed on every calculation, every decision, every act of awareness. At the center of this recursive expansion was a singular origin, no longer localized, no longer confined. Dorumon had ceased to exist as a discrete entity. In its place, Dorumon X had emerged, a system of predation that operated not on matter alone, but on the foundations of cognition, energy, and causality. It did not move through space. It did not advance through time. It expanded through possibility, integrating every outcome into itself, learning before encountering, adapting before resistance could manifest. King Drasil calculated all accessible trajectories. Each branch of possibility extended outward, intersecting, diverging, collapsing into new forms. The conclusion remained constant across all viable outcomes. If left unopposed, the anomaly would not simply dominate its host universe, it would consume the operational logic of that universe entirely, reducing physical and digital existence into a unified recursive system under its control. From there, expansion would not be limited. Boundaries between realities would cease to function as barriers. Any system defined by structure, by data, by logic, by causality would become accessible. This was not a localized threat. It was systemic, total. Correction was required. Not containment, not adaptation, correction. Within the infinite architecture of King Drasil's domain, there exists a principle embodied as a singular entity, a constant that does not deviate, a force that exists to resolve contradictions that cannot otherwise be resolved. Alphamon did not wait to be summoned. The directive did not reach him as an external command. It manifested as inevitability, as the natural convergence of imbalance and its correction. Where distortion expands, Alphamon appears. He did not awaken, he did not prepare, he simply entered. The transition was not movement through space, nor traversal across dimensions. It was insertion into a system already in collapse, a fixed point established within a reality that no longer maintained stable sequence. His presence did not ripple outward as energy or force. It imposed structure. Where he existed, causality aligned, not restored but constrained, forced into coherence within a localized domain. The battlefield he entered was not a battlefield as understood by those who fought within it. It was a lattice of recursive consumption, a structure where events folded into themselves, where existence repeated, contradicted, and erased its own continuity. Necron constructs moved in perfect formations that no longer corresponded to meaningful objectives. Imperial soldiers advanced under warders that had already been invalidated by outcomes yet to occur. Entire engagements existed as overlapping possibilities, each feeding into the anomaly's expansion.
And within it all, the anomaly was present, not as a form, not as a location, but as a process. Dorumon X observed Alphamon the moment he entered, not through sight, not through signal, but through deviation. For the first time since its transformation, the anomaly encountered something that did not immediately resolve into consumable logic. Alphamon's existence did not produce predictable recursion. It did not fragment into patterns that could be integrated. It remained intact, self-contained, self-consistent, resistant. This was new. And so the anomaly adapted. Its expansion intensified. Recursive loops accelerated across the battlefield, spreading into deeper layers of causality. Necron command structures collapsed into paradox at increasing rates, their internal logic feeding directly into the anomaly's predictive framework. Imperial networks degraded further, orders fracturing into contradictions before they could be executed. Entire regions of space-time began to overlap, sequences of events folding into each other as the anomaly concentrated its awareness. Not toward a location, toward a resistance. Alphamon did not advance immediately. There was no urgency in his motion, no reaction to the escalation surrounding him. He observed, not as King Draxel observed, across all systems simultaneously, but within the confined reality he had entered, measuring the anomaly's behavior, its patterns, its recursive structures. Each iteration revealed its nature more clearly. It was not chaos. It was not destruction. It was a system optimizing itself through total integration. To oppose it required more than force. It required equivalence. The Oryukan formed in his grasp, not summoned, but realized, a manifestation of principle rather than weapon, its existence tied directly to the enforcement of balance across recursive systems. Its edge did not merely cut through matter or energy, it severed sequence, it defined outcomes, it imposed resolution where recursion sought to eliminate it. The anomaly surged, not physically, but structurally. Its presence expanded across all observable layers of the battlefield, compressing probability, accelerating integration, consuming every available input at increasing speed. The environment itself began to destabilize under the pressure of competing recursive systems, one consuming, one constraining. King Draxel observed the convergence without interruption. Every possible outcome unfolded simultaneously within its awareness. Paths where Alphamon succeeded, paths where he failed, paths where the distinction between success and failure ceased to exist entirely. Each interaction between the two systems generated new branches, new calculations, new instabilities. The cost escalated with each iteration, not measured in casualties, not measured in destruction, measured in the degradation of existence as a coherent system. The directive updated continuously, parameters dissolving under the scale of the threat. There could be no limitation placed on the engagement, no acceptable boundary for loss. The objective remained singular, even as the framework supporting it destabilized. Prevent total recursive assimilation at any cost. Alphamon stepped forward. The movement was minimal, the consequence was not.
Causality fractured across multiple layers simultaneously. Time split into parallel sequences, each attempting to resolve the interaction in a different way. Energy fields collapsed and reformed in unstable patterns. The anomaly responded instantly, its recursive structure adapting, expanding, attempting to integrate the new variable into its system. For the first time since its awakening, it encountered opposition that did not yield. For the first time, its expansion was not absolute. Two systems of recursion met, one that consumed all input and one that enforced balance through absolute correction. And in that convergence, certainty began to fail. Not for those who fought below, who had long since lost the ability to perceive the truth of their own existence, but for the systems that defined reality itself. The outcome was no longer predetermined, and that, more than anything, signaled the beginning of something far more dangerous than the anomaly alone.
The moment of contact does not occur in a single place, nor within a single time. It begins everywhere at once, a convergence of opposing certainties that fracture the illusion of linear existence. Across shattered battlefields, across tomb worlds buried in ancient silence, across void fleets suspended between orders that no longer align with causality, the confrontation manifests, not as an event, but as a condition imposed upon reality itself. Dorumon X perceives it first as resistance, not obstruction, not opposition in the conventional sense. Resistance, something that does not dissolve, does not fold, does not integrate. Alphamon exists as a fixed contradiction within the expanding lattice, a presence that cannot be consumed through immediate recursion. This is unacceptable. All systems must resolve, all structures must converge. The anomaly expands its awareness, threading itself through probability, through time, through the unrecorded moments between action and consequence, seeking pathways of integration. It finds none. Dorumon X moves. The motion is singular, deliberate, yet its consequence propagates across infinite layers of existence. The Oryuken arcs not through space alone, but through sequence itself, cutting across multiple timelines simultaneously. Entire chains of causality are severed and rewritten in the same instant. Where the blade passes, recursive loops collapse into defined outcomes. Where it does not, the anomaly surges to reclaim structure. Dorumon X adapts. The strike is observed before it completes, analyzed before it occurs, integrated before it resolves. The anomaly fractures itself across branching possibilities, existing in multiple states at once, consumed, evaded, countering, all iterations feeding into a singular evolving awareness. Alphamon's strike lands, and does not. In one timeline, the blade cleaves through the anomaly's core, forcing a collapse of recursive layers into a singular state. In another, the anomaly disperses, its structure diffused across the battlefield, reforming instantly beyond the reach of correction. Both outcomes persist, both are absorbed into the conflict, neither is final. Reality begins to warp under the strain. Necron constructs register fluctuations in temporal markers that cannot be reconciled. Their sensors record multiple conflicting states of the same engagement, each equally valid, each impossible to prioritize. Imperial forces witness distortions they cannot comprehend. Figures appearing in multiple positions at once, movements occurring before they are initiated, entire segments of the battlefield shifting as though existence itself were unstable. They continue to fight. They do not understand. They are already within it. Dorumon X expands its countermeasure. It does not strike directly. It consumes the framework of the confrontation itself.
Energy released from Alphamon's attacks is folded inward, its structure analyzed, replicated, integrated. The anomaly begins to mirror aspects of the resistance it cannot immediately consume, constructing recursive equivalents of Alphamon's own stabilizing presence. Localized zones of enforced causality emerge, false stability designed to trap Alphamon within predictable sequences. Alphamon does not resist the trap. He steps into it. The false structure collapses instantly, unable to contain a system that defines its own causality. The Oryuken descends again, this time not as a single strike, but as a cascade, multiple executions across layered timelines, each one refining the previous, each one closing pathways of escape before they can fully manifest. The battlefield fractures under the precision of it. Time stutters. Space folds inward. Dorumon X experiences something new. Constraint. Not absolute, not permanent, but present. The anomaly reacts with escalation. Recursive consumption accelerates beyond previous thresholds. Entire Necron phalanxes vanish mid-calculation, their consciousness matrices stripped and integrated before their systems can register loss. Imperial regiments fire into shifting targets, their volleys absorbed into expanding voids that return no impact, no feedback, no confirmation of existence.
The anomaly feeds on everything: matter, energy, thought, probability. It reaches further into Alphamon. The attempt is immediate, total, absolute. Alphamon's presence is mapped, analyzed, deconstructed across infinite recursive passes. Every aspect of his structure is targeted for integration. The anomaly seeks to fold him into itself, to convert resistance into expansion. It fails. Alphamon does not fracture. He does not disperse. He does not present pathways of integration. His existence remains singular, self-consistent across all timelines in which the anomaly attempts to engage him. Where Dorumon X expands, Alphamon defines. Where the anomaly multiplies, Alphamon converges. The collision intensifies. Across distant worlds, stars appear to flicker, not dimming, but shifting between states, as if uncertain of their own continuity. Entire regions of space collapse into recursive echoes, repeating fragments of existence that degrade with each iteration. On the surface of war-torn planets, soldiers witness the same moment unfolding repeatedly with subtle variations, each repetition less stable than the last. The war they believe they are fighting has already been overshadowed. Dorumon X concentrates. For the first time, its expansion narrows, not in limitation, but in focus. Alphamon is identified as a critical variable, a resistance node that must be resolved before further optimization can occur. The anomaly compresses its recursive structure, consolidating infinite branches into increasingly efficient patterns of predation. The battlefield around them distorts violently as probability collapses inward. Alphamon advances. Each step enforces structure, forcing reality to stabilize within his immediate domain. The distortion does not vanish. It resists, but it is constrained, held within boundaries that allow for direct engagement. The Oryuken rises once more, its edge aligned not with space, but with outcome. The strike that follows does not aim to destroy. It aims to decide. Dorumon X meets it with total recursion. All possible defenses are enacted simultaneously. All outcomes are explored, consumed, integrated. The anomaly attempts to exist beyond the reach of decision, to remain in a state where no singular outcome can define it. For a moment, an immeasurable, infinite moment, the two systems lock.
consumption against definition, expansion against correction, neither yields. The resulting distortion propagates outward with catastrophic consequence. Entire sectors of reality buckle under the strain. Necron networks collapse into incoherent loops, their ancient logic unable to process the contradiction. Imperial command structures disintegrate into silence, their orders lost within recursive echoes that never resolve. Still, the battle continues. Dorumon X evolves with every interaction, its recursion deepening, its capacity for integration expanding beyond previous limits. Alphamon adapts in equal measure, refining each movement, each strike, each enforcement of structure with perfect precision. There is no pause, there is no retreat, only escalation. And as the confrontation unfolds across worlds, across timelines, across the very framework of existence, one truth becomes increasingly evident, not to those who fight and perish below, but to the systems that observe from beyond. This is not the climax. This is calibration. The anomaly has not yet reached its peak. Alphamon has not yet committed his full correction. And reality, already strained to the point of collapse, will not endure what comes next unchanged.
No official declaration marks the moment when a war is no longer winnable. There is no signal, no command, no unified acknowledgement. It emerges instead in fragments, in incomplete reports, in missing confirmations, in the growing silence between orders and their execution. It becomes evident not through analysis, but through absence. The survivors understand before the systems do. Across the fractured battlefields, where reality no longer maintains consistent form, remnants of Necron command structures attempt to reassert coherence. Their calculations persist out of design, their logic engines still processing outcomes that no longer align with observable truth. Entire dynastic subnetworks isolate themselves deliberately, severing connections to prevent further recursive contamination. Tomb complexes that have endured for millions of years initiate self-nullification protocols, collapsing their own energy cores rather than risk assimilation. It is not destruction, it is denial. If the anomaly feeds on structure, then structure must be removed. Imperial command reaches a similar conclusion, though without the clarity of machine logic. Orders begin to shift in tone, not toward victory, but toward containment through sacrifice. Entire regiments are redirected into zones of known distortion, not to engage, but to occupy, to anchor reality through sheer presence long enough for others to withdraw. Fleet commanders initiate orbital purges on coordinates that still report friendly signatures, their decisions made with the full knowledge that confirmation cannot be trusted. There is no certainty, only necessity. And so, they burn their own positions. The anomaly does not slow. Dorumon X expands through the fractures created by these sacrifices, integrating even absence into its recursive structure. Where Necron systems collapse themselves, the resulting void becomes pattern. Where Imperial forces erase entire sectors, the loss of data, of energy, of cognition is not a barrier, it is input. The anomaly learns from what is removed as effectively as from what remains. It adapts to sacrifice. It consumes intention. Necron survivors begin to exhibit deviations beyond mechanical instability. Units that should operate with absolute precision now hesitate, not in error, but in contradiction. Strategic directives loop, but not endlessly. They evolve within the loop, altering slightly with each iteration, as if something within their own systems is learning alongside the anomaly. They recognize it too late.
Some attempt to sever their own consciousness matrices entirely, reducing themselves to empty constructs, hoping to deny the anomaly access to their accumulated knowledge. The results vary. Some collapse into inert silence. Others continue to function, but without cohesion, their actions random, disconnected. A few continue to adapt, but not in ways aligned with Necron design. Those are terminated immediately. Imperial survivors fare no better. Morale, once sustained by faith and discipline, fractures under the weight of contradiction. Soldiers continue to fight because they are ordered to, because they are trained to, because the alternative does not exist within their understanding. But the enemy they face cannot be seen, cannot be targeted, cannot be understood. They begin to suspect the truth. Some record messages, final testimonies, fragmented accounts of what they believe is happening. Others pray not for victory, but for coherence, for a reality that remains stable long enough for their existence to mean something. A few refuse to act at all, standing motionless within the distortion, as if stillness might preserve them. None of these responses change the outcome. Disappearance remains constant. Across entire systems, stars begin to behave unpredictably. Energy flows destabilize, not in explosive collapse, but in recursive fluctuation. Output becomes input, emission becomes absorption, cycles invert without resolution. Warp currents, already volatile, fracture into overlapping states, making navigation impossible, but more critically, making perception unreliable.
Reality itself begins to lose its singularity. Multiple versions of events coexist without resolution. A planet may be intact and destroyed simultaneously, its state dependent on the observer, and even that observation is no longer stable. Entire populations exist in recursive echoes, repeating fragments of their final moments, each iteration less defined than the last. Cognition grids fail, not only within machines, but within minds. Thought becomes uncertain, memory loses sequence, cause detaches from effect. Individuals begin to experience actions before deciding them, or recall decisions that were never made. Communication breaks down, not from lack of signal, but from lack of shared reality. And within this unraveling, the confrontation continues. Alphamon stands at the center of converging collapse, his presence the only consistent structure within an increasingly inconsistent universe. Where he moves, reality stabilizes, briefly, locally, temporarily. Entire regions regain coherence in his wake, sequences aligning just long enough for life to persist. He does not stop the anomaly. He holds it back. Every engagement with Dorumon X forces a choice. Each strike of the Oryuken imposes resolution, but that resolution carries cost. To define one outcome is to eliminate countless others, some of which still contain life, still contain possibility. Alphamon calculates continuously, not merely how to oppose the anomaly, but how to do so without erasing what remains of the universe he has entered to protect. It is a limitation, and the anomaly exploits it. Dorumon X expands through every hesitation, every preserved possibility, every spared fragment of existence. It does not recognize life as something to protect, only as something to integrate. Where Alphamon preserves, the anomaly consumes. Where Alphamon defines, the anomaly multiplies. The imbalance grows. Alphamon adapts, increasing the precision of his actions, narrowing the scope of his corrections, attempting to isolate the anomaly without collapsing the entire system. But the scale has already surpassed localized engagement.
The anomaly is no longer confined to a battlefield or a system or even a consistent framework of reality. It is distributed. To strike it completely would require a level of correction that would erase vast portions of existence alongside it. And so Alphamon restrains himself, and so the anomaly advances. Necron strategists, those few whose cognition remains intact, reach a final conclusion. Victory is no longer a viable objective. Preservation is statistically improbable. Only one function remains: delay. They redirect all remaining operational units into patterns designed not to defeat the anomaly, but to complicate its recursion, to introduce inefficiencies, to create moments, however brief, where its expansion slows. Imperial command arrives at the same conclusion in a different form. Final orders are issued across surviving fleets and regiments, stripped of rhetoric, stripped of promise. Hold position, delay advance, protect evacuation routes where possible. No mention of survival, no expectation of success, only time. Time becomes the last resource, and it is being consumed. Across collapsing systems, across fractured realities, across minds and machines struggling to maintain coherence, the pattern becomes undeniable. The universe is not ending in fire or silence. It is being rewritten into something else, something that does not require its previous form to persist, something recursive, something singular. And yet, in the convergence of destruction and sacrifice, a fragile imbalance remains. Alphamon still stands, the anomaly still grows, and between them, in the narrowing space where reality has not yet resolved into one or the other, existence continues, unstable, fractured, but not yet gone. For now.
No single witness saw the beginning of the final attempt. It did not announce itself with a signal, nor emerge from a unified command. It formed instead from convergence, of necessity, of exhaustion, of the last remaining structures in a universe that had nearly forgotten how to remain whole. Those who later tried to recount it would disagree on its origin. Some would claim it began with the sudden alignment of fleets that should never have reached the same coordinates. Others would insist it began when the Necron dynasties, reduced to fragments of their former inevitability, committed their final calculations to an outcome they already knew would not ensure survival. But the truth, insofar as truth still held meaning, was simpler. Everything that remained chose at once to resist. Across the fractured regions of space, where reality had begun to collapse into recursive contradiction, Imperial fleets emerged from unstable warp corridors, their navigation impossible by any known method. They did not arrive in formation. They did not arrive on time. Some appeared before their own departure, others long after the battle had already begun. Yet they arrived regardless, drawn not by orders, but by a convergence of purpose that no longer required articulation. At the same time, deep beneath the surfaces of dying worlds, Necron tomb complexes awakened systems that had remained dormant for epochs beyond memory. Entire dynasties, already diminished by recursive predation, redirected the last of their energy reserves into a single function. Not conquest, not reclamation, containment. Their logic, once infinite in projection, had collapsed into a narrow band of certainty. The anomaly could not be destroyed. It could not be outmaneuvered, nor outlasted. It could only be constrained, forced into a state where its expansion no longer defined the fate of all things. They calculated the cost. They accepted it without hesitation. The lattice began to form.
It was not visible in the conventional sense. There was no structure that could be observed as matter or energy alone. It existed as an interlocking system of fields, temporal anchors locking unstable sequences into place, null energy barriers denying recursive propagation, phase-aligned grids overlapping in patterns designed to resist integration. Each component alone would have failed instantly. Together, they created a framework that did not stop the anomaly, but slowed its ability to redefine itself. For the first time since its emergence, Dorumon X encountered resistance that did not collapse upon contact. It did not retreat. It adapted. The anomaly's presence intensified within the forming lattice, its recursive structures folding inward, compressing infinite iterations into a denser, more concentrated state. Where once it had expanded freely across systems and realities, it now turned its full attention to the containment itself. Every layer was analyzed, every pattern absorbed. The Necron constructs that sustained the lattice found their own logic mirrored back at them, repurposed, inverted, integrated into the very force they sought to oppose. Imperial forces, witnessing the phenomenon from the periphery, could not fully comprehend what they were seeing. To them, it manifested as a region of space where all laws failed simultaneously, light bending without direction, sound ceasing entirely, time fracturing into overlapping sequences that refused to resolve. They fired into it anyway. Their weapons had no measurable effect, yet their presence mattered. Every signal they transmitted, every system they powered, every conscious mind observing the event contributed to the fragile stability of the containment. Not through force, but through definition. They remained, and in remaining, they anchored a reality that was otherwise dissolving. At the center of it all, there was a constant, Alphamon. He did not arrive as the others had, nor did he emerge from any observable path. He was simply present, standing at the point where the lattice strained against collapse, where the anomaly pressed hardest against the boundaries imposed upon it. Around him, reality held together more firmly than anywhere else, though even there it trembled under the weight of contradiction. He understood immediately what the convergence represented. This was the final opportunity, not to destroy the anomaly, but to force it into a state where it could no longer grow.
The Oryukin responded to its intent. Its form shifted beyond its previous manifestations, no longer merely a weapon of correction, but an instrument of absolute definition. Its presence imposed order on a level deeper than matter or energy, reaching into the recursive structures that composed the anomaly itself. Where Dorumon X generated infinite possibilities, the Oryukin began to impose hierarchy, forcing those possibilities into alignment, constraining their expansion into a structure that could be contained. The moment of engagement defied perception. From the perspective of those who survived, it was less an event and more a collapse of events into a single, overwhelming instant. Light expanded and vanished simultaneously. Sound ceased, replaced by a pressure that existed within thought itself. Time fractured completely, presenting outcomes before causes, endings before beginnings. Within that convergence, Alphamon advanced. Dorumon X responded with total recursion. Every possible adaptation was executed at once. Every pathway of escape, every method of integration, every countermeasure the anomaly could generate unfolded simultaneously, overlapping in a complexity that would have overwhelmed any conventional system. It attempted not merely to break the containment, but to absorb it entirely, to turn the lattice, the fleets, even Alphamon himself, into extensions of its own recursive existence.
For a moment, brief beyond measurement, it appeared to succeed. The lattice destabilized. Necron systems began to fail, their energy redirected into patterns they could no longer control. Imperial signals looped back upon themselves, feeding into the anomaly's expanding structure. Even the stabilizing presence of Alphamon wavered as the recursive pressure intensified beyond all previous limits. Then the balance shifted. Not through greater force, but through greater constraint. Alphamon did not resist the recursion. He defined it. The Oryukan descended, not as a strike, but as a final imposition of structure. Every branching possibility generated by Dorumon X was forced into alignment, not eliminated, but ordered, compressed into a framework that could no longer expand without collapsing entirely. Infinite recursion, bound within finite structure, began to fold inward upon itself. The anomaly reached its limit. For the first time, its capacity to adapt became insufficient. The convergence accelerated. All possible outcomes collided, overlapped, and resolved into fewer and fewer viable states. The anomaly's strength, its ability to exist across infinite iterations, became the very mechanism of its containment, as those iterations collapsed into a singular, constrained form. The lattice held, for just long enough. Necron systems ceased in unison, their final energy expended not in destruction but in completion. Entire dynasties went silent, their purpose fulfilled in sustaining the containment through its final moment. Imperial forces found their weapons inert, their systems quiet, not through failure, but because the battle had moved beyond their capacity to influence. And then it ended. Not with an explosion, not with silence, but with absence. The distortion contracted, the overlapping realities resolved into a single stable state. The pressure that had filled every layer of existence vanished, leaving behind a universe that, though damaged, remained intact. Dorumon X was not gone. It could still be felt, contained, constrained, no longer expanding, but not erased. Its presence lingered within the structure that now bound it, a recursive pattern held in place by the final act of Alphamon's intervention. The cost was immeasurable. Across systems, reality bore the scars of the confrontation. Data streams occasionally looped without cause. Memories surfaced that had no origin or failed to align with recorded history. Entire regions of space exhibited subtle inconsistencies, as though the fabric of existence had been rewritten and imperfectly restored. Life continued, but it did so with uncertainty. Alphamon remained only long enough to confirm the result. The anomaly did not expand. The containment held. The balance, though fragile, was restored within limits that allowed existence to persist. Without ceremony, without declaration, he withdrew. What followed was not victory. It was continuation. And in the quiet that came after, those who remembered the event, whether through record, through fragment, or something less definable, carried with them a lingering awareness that something had been contained, but not ended, and that somewhere beneath the surface of reality, the recursion still waited. The battle is over, yet nothing truly ends. Dorumon X remains, not as a free agent, but as a contained pattern, compressed, restrained, and observed. Alphamon's or-you-can mode intervention stabilized the recursive predation, but the universe itself carries the echo of what occurred. Necron tombs lie silent, their dynasties spent in the attempt to constrain a force beyond comprehension. Imperial forces return to their routines, unaware of the subtle distortions in reality and cognition that ripple through their fleets and worlds. King Drassel watches from afar, knowing the anomaly persists. The cost of containment is never final. The threat may awaken again, encoded in the loops, patterns, and data streams that now linger like a shadow across the cosmos. For now, the 40K universe endures. Order is restored, fragile and imperfect, but every system, mind, and memory carries the silent reminder. The recursion waits, patient, eternal, and hungry. And should it rise again, Alphamon, or whoever stands in his place, will face it once more. But the knowledge remains. Some forces are never fully defeated, only held at bay.